Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Brian and myself are going to give a few updates on ourselves. We're going to cover some recent news. It's kind of negatively affected both of us, I feel comfortable saying. And then we got a bunch of cool questions we're going to dig into. But before we get into those things, Brian, what's up?
Yeah, everything's good over here. For anyone who has followed my journey on my story, I went out to eat on Friday night with Kim, one of the non-negotiables where we get a date night we try to do every week, but it's usually every 2 or 3 weeks. And we just happened to go to a place that it was really, really hard for me to stick to exactly what I wanted to do. And so I ended up kind of just going in and eating a few bites of this and a few bites of that. And by the end of the night, when I went back to kind of add it all up, I'd realized that I was at like 3,200 calories for the day. And I kept referencing over the last few days in my story how like one night of 3,200 calories or 3,600 or just one big night of eating in general has very little impact when I'm in an earlier stage of the diet. Like if I'm sitting at 190, 195 pounds, whatever, I can absorb that meal and then have one low day that follows. And I'm like right back on track as if it never happened. But now where I was prior to that meal was 186.6, which was the lowest I've been on this diet so far. And I, uh, I ended up eating that meal and now it's Tuesday. So it's 4 days later and I just hit 187.0 this morning. So I'm still above where I was prior, but it's finally kind of worked its way down over 4 days from like 188.8, 188.2, 187.8. And like, it's just been this like really slow grind to get back. And it's like, I'm like torn on the way I feel about it because like there's a side of me that was like, man, that was a great meal. Like I really enjoyed it. It allowed me to have really good training sessions. It satiated me to the point that then I have had 3 low days in a row. So I had a 2,300, a 2,300, and then a 2,600. And I haven't been like extremely hungry on those lower days since the higher day. So it does serve a purpose in like the grand scheme. I think that I can look at it from a positive lens and realize that in the grand scheme of things, it's all good. But then on the other side of it, you're like, man, I've been dieting for 3 months already. Like, I really just want to get to my goal of 182 or whatever it is that I want to get to. And when I do something like this, I'm like 4 or 5 days behind schedule. So it's like another 4 or 5 days before I start working back toward my goal again. And you just feel like you're treading water, sort of. And when you're dieting, that's just like not a fun mindset to be in. So there's definitely like two ways that I'm feeling about it. And, just gonna move on and learn from it.
Couple questions for you.
Yep.
With your current diet, like how do you feel subjectively around the diet impacting your quality of life, how you're like food focused type thing, like just I'm really asking around the general like negativities that people associate with dieting. How would you say you like subjectively are perceiving yourself in it right now?
There's been very little of it, to be honest. I've allowed myself to have those nights out, maybe once a week, or if it's not a night out, then it's allowing myself to have a higher calorie day or two each week, where I like that approach, even though it means that I then have to go slightly lower on the other days. Like I could probably sustain like 2,700 calories across the board, and I'd probably still lose weight at this point. But I really kind of like having that 3,200 or 3,000 calorie day because it allows me to just to eat a couple of the foods that maybe I've been wanting without it impacting the overall result. So as far as like food goes, I haven't experienced like a ton of rampant desire for foods that aren't on the plan or anything like that. Like I've kind of been able to fit it in. I haven't been super hungry. I would say if there's any hunger at all, it's really just like the hour or two before bed, which is exactly the way I want it because then I just go to sleep and I wake up and I'm not hungry anymore. I haven't been like crabby or upset or short or any of those things. Like Kim actually pointed out the other day, she was like, you've really done a phenomenal job this diet of like not impacting your family negatively as you're undergoing this. So I thought that was really cool because that was one of the priorities that I had for myself going into it. And I know it gets harder and harder as we get leaner and leaner, and it's completely possible that maybe I'm just not that lean yet. Like, I look at myself and I look lean because of where I hold fat and stuff like that, but like it's very possible that maybe I'm not even as lean as I think I am. Like, I think I'm at 9% body fat right now, but I could be at 12. So I don't really know, to be honest, but so far so good. And yeah, I mean, I guess there's moments like I bake. I still bake, even though I don't eat it. I still tend to bake, and so when I bring that, like the other day, I made a like a chocolate chip coffee cake type thing, and served it to Kim and the kids, and I grabbed a crumb or two as they were coming off the plate, and like just that taste of getting the crumb in my mouth, I was like, oh my god, if I wasn't dieting right now, I could devour like 18 pieces of this thing. And so that felt like a little limiting and restrictive, but overall all good.
Yeah. A couple questions I asked, or one thing I wanted to follow up with. Get a DEXA. See where you're at.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that's really interesting with DEXAs is the pricing like varies wildly. So every single time I've gotten them done now in San Diego and Austin, Texas, here in Salt Lake. It's about $65, $67. Salt Lake actually had a cool deal where I got 2 for $95. So I'll get another one, before I leave. I'm like, yeah, of course I'll take that. Then I've like looked it up for like clients like nearby and stuff, and they'll be like $140. I'm like, it's literally double what I'm paying in these other places. So it's really interesting of like where you're at location wise, the pricing and stuff there. But that one was surprising to me. I did not expect the numbers to come back as low as they did.
For your DEXA when you were like 11 DEXA or whatever? Yeah.
Well, that one in Austin, it was at 10.8, and then I just did one last week and I was 8.8.
Oh, wow. I don't even remember seeing that one on
I put it on my story one day. So it was like leaner than I had expected it to be, for sure. So that was interesting. And it gives you numbers, right? It gives you, pretty much the gold standard. I'm using gold standard with air quotes. It's generally accepted. I'm sure there's of course there's going to be open for variation and calibration on different machines and stuff like that. But just gives you, put some more data to it.
I find it really interesting that like even the DEXA, which is the gold standard, is very affected by like hydration levels or food consumption and things like that prior. So even though like we always talk about it on the little in-body scanner, like how important those variables are. But it's interesting to me that those are also super important on a DEXA. And I've seen a lot of clients mess that up and just be like, oh, it's the gold standard, so it doesn't really matter. And like one day they're like drinking coffee and eating food on the way to it. And then the next time it's like 8 a.m. and they're fasted and they're like, it says I've lost muscle. And like, it's very interesting to me that way. You have to be aware of it.
Good thing to bring that up. Yeah, anything like that, I always recommend going in and doing it fasted. Scheduling it for the morning if, schedule allows for it. I had some coffee, black coffee for mine, and water, and that was it. And, the last thing I had was my meal before. It's just too easy. It's too easy the technology is limited because technically, like, I could have loaded 600 grams of carbs the day before, or like over a day and a half before and tried, rapid glycogen manipulation. And I would have increased my lean body mass by probably 2 pounds on it, So you can manipulate these things because, I don't even want to say technically, but, when you load glycogen, like that's lean body mass, that's inside the muscle cell. But it's like, temporary-ish because you're fluctuating levels of that. So just knowing these things, and then, if you were to do a DEXA one time and you like load your glycogen, and then the next time you don't, like you need to establish some level of consistency for yourself so that the technology you're not like, trying to trick the technology or whatever and with your own
It does account for body water though, right?
Some of it, I'm not 100% sure. The one thing I'm not sure on is how they calculate your total body mass, if they like account for your clothes or not. Because the last 2 DEXAs I had were like, I weighed in at like 190 and change that morning of this most recent one, and it said my body mass was like 196.3. Same thing when I did the one in Austin, I was, plus or minus, 199, 200 pounds, like right on the dot. And that one pulled my total body mass at 205 and change. And
wow.
I don't think I'm drinking 5 pounds of, water and coffee from 7 a.m.
Right.
to like 9:30 when I'm going in and getting it done. So I think there might be, maybe the clothes do get picked up. I'm not sure there.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, anything else on the end of your diet and how you're feeling?
No, I think that's probably a good place to stop it. What's going on with you?
So I'm continuing my reverse. And what's really interesting is it's a positive thing, but it's also makes it a little bit more challenging in my opinion. My calories are now reversing back up, right? My training days are up around 2,800. I'm not even sure what my rest day calories are. But my hunger is like now, I would say, not necessarily like worse in a negative standpoint, but I'm hungrier now than when I was at the end of my diet, because now I'm having these like refeed days and I'm just, providing my body those higher volumes, those higher carbohydrates. So like your hunger picks up, that sort of thing picks up. So I would say from like an adherence level, it's harder now, than at the tail end of my diet, because of just those adaptations that are now kind of, I'm reaping like the positive benefit of the adaptations coming back up. So hunger is a little bit higher. But I mean, it's easy for me. I'm still stacking a lot of my carbohydrate around my training window, and then I just have a lot of vegetables in my last 2 meals of the day, which I really like, because then it helps me balance, like, okay, I'm having like a post-workout meal of just like a shake, cream of rice and a banana, and like no vegetables or anything like that, but then I have like 200 plus grams of vegetables with my lunch too and my dinner. So I mean, I'm still eating over a pound of fresh vegetables every single day. So from like my overall diet quality, and that I think was like the biggest takeaway from my diet this year, was once calories got a little bit lower, or once carbohydrate got to around like body weight, you know what I mean, or a little bit above body weight, I wouldn't have any starchy carbs with my last 2 meals of the day. I would just have a ton of vegetables and do those stir fries, and like I was completely satiated. There was like never any hunger. But I was able to like still progress my training like throughout the end of my diet. I was still adding reps, still increasing weight, and it was the first time I had never experienced the like lull of training from dieting. Even though my diet was the longest it ever was this time. I mean, don't get me wrong, my starting point was the highest it ever was as well, but I did diet for 18 weeks, straight.
Weren't you 227 at one point, dude?
Yeah, I was 227. My first like successful diet where I like hired a coach and was fortunate to like link up with Jason and stuff. We went from 227 to 196 in 15 weeks.
Yeah, that's a long diet. How long was it?
15 weeks, so like just over 4 months.
Okay.
But again, it was like I was one of those like oddballs out with like dieting. Like I just literally ate too much food for like years of my life. There wasn't like a lot of like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I had some pretty shitty habits, but like I would fuck around and go eat 4,000 calories after a training day, at wing night, like weekly.
Right.
And I still had breakfast, lunch, my post-workout meal, and then I would just go have a 4,000 calorie dinner. Like I did those sorts of things regularly. So I've never been like afraid of eating. I just needed someone to be like, this is the information you need. I'm going to like walk you through it. And I was like, holy shit, this works.
I'm losing weight.
Yeah, that one was pretty easy. The only hard thing with that one was because we were trying to address some of my glucose sensitivity issues and insulin sensitivity issues. So we went through like periods of like, not like traditional keto, but where fat was really high, but where like carbs were really low. I was having like basically protein, vegetable days with like, fats to cover my bare minimums. And those like training on that is just undesirable. So that one was hard because of some of that. But aside from that, it's never been, difficult for me. But that's because I always spend so much time eating so much. Like even I just wrapped up this 18-week diet, which was, I lost 17 pounds in 18 weeks. And 18 weeks is what? Like 16 weeks is 4 months, like 4.5 months. Yeah. But I spent over 8 months in a surplus.
Right.
So
right.
I still like doubled that.
Too, yeah.
Yeah, I still doubled that time. And I think it was, for the first like 2 months, like I was just happy to not be eating 4,000 calories every single day anymore. Like it was pure pleasure at that point. And then I was like, okay, I'm, now have to tighten things up. But it was nice to have that. But what I wanted to get into about mine is I'm kind of in my coaching and my practice or whatever, I preach a lot of this. Hey, we want to eat a lot of food. We want to establish our baseline. We want to push for really high maintenance calories because it makes then our dieting it's much more easier to be adherent because we can diet on higher calories type of thing. And it's like, generally very, very positive. However, there is a downside of it. And that is when you want to then put weight back on because you're already eating a fair amount of food when your diet ends type of deal. So that is where I'm finding myself at now. I'm, still hovering in the 190 to 191 range. I want to get up to like the 195 to 196 range, but my calories are already back at like the 2,800 change. And, on Thursday when I have my check-in, they'll probably go up another, I don't even know how much, maybe another 30 grams of carbs, 40 grams of carbs, 50 grams of carbs, something like that. And I'm fearful that I'm going to find myself in a similar scenario. To get back to that 195. I'm going to have to be pushing 37, 38, 3,900 calories again. Yeah. It's just a lot of food. So it's like it works great on the dieting end, but then you kind of create the opposite problem when you want to go back up, is you need to eat so much more.
I don't even look at that as a problem. I look at that as a very positive adaptation. Like, dude, I get to eat 3,700 calories.
It is until it's not. Like, everything works until it doesn't, right? It's fun until it's not. Because it's like, sometimes I'm just like, your hunger won't match it sometimes. And I don't like okay, well, I'm going to have these lower quality foods because I need to get the calories in, because at the end of the day, I try to tie everything back to health. I don't, and in many cases, a lot of like dieting stuff, physique pursuits, like the health aspect gets really like dropped and missed, where people aren't having vegetables. They're like, oh, I have my greens shake in the morning. Like, I don't need to eat vegetables type of thing. But for me, I always want to tie everything back to the health, and I never want to like lose sight of that. So I don't want to be like crushing candy just to get my calories in and stuff like that, for sure.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I mean, I guess for me, it's like, I really enjoy things like bagels that I don't get to have on this diet, and perfect bars. And so like just the addition of like a perfect bar and a bagel every day would make me so happy. And all the other habits can stay the exact same as dieting, but that nets me like an extra 800 calories a day, and I'm just like in heaven from those two things alone. And then everything else is good. So for me, that's how I look at it. I'm like, yes, 800 extra calories, I'm in,
Yeah. I have a question for you. So
yep.
the perfect bars, if I remember correctly, they were created in San Diego, were they not?
Correct, yes.
I remember, because we used to crush them all the time, and then it's something that like it's been a staple in your life, I feel like, for a full decade now.
Yep.
Remember when like in like maybe, I don't know, 2012, maybe 2013, the company started like expanding and they like changed how they were made? I couldn't ever like get past that change, and then I stopped eating them. Like, I was like, I don't like these were incredible. Now they're like 80% of what they used to be. I'm not buying them anymore. And I'm surprised, and I just want to it was never a problem for you.
Yeah, no, I didn't really like the change either, but I realized, so you know how like every time you get basically any food that isn't processed, it's different than the prior time. So like you can have strawberries that are like phenomenal, or you can have strawberries that you're like, oh, these are like strawberries, like what's going on, right? So you can have the same thing with literally any food that isn't entirely processed. So perfect bars are kind of the same way. So when they made this change or whatever it was, and the bar didn't taste as good, this bothered me. So I inquired with their headquarters team about what is going on with the perfect bar. And they said that they didn't actually make like a massive change to the ingredient list or anything. It's just that how the honey is sourced and what the texture of the honey is determines the texture and the consistency of the bar, and that this batch of honey that they got is like a little drier, so the bars kind of turned out a little drier for like half of a year or whatever it was. And then when they got the new batch in that was like lighter and more like syrupy or whatever it is, like the texture kind of went back to what it was.
Interesting. Okay, because now like sometimes like I'll see them in the airport now, right? And it's really wild to see where they came from when they were just in the one Sprouts, right, in PB.
Yeah.
And I'll like get one, and I'm like, and I'll eat it, and like it's good, but I just think like, damn, these used to be so much better. So I think kind of a note.
Yeah, it just depends, I think, on that batch of honey. Because even now, I still get like bad ones, but a majority of them are pretty good. And then also, I noticed that like if they're over chilled, like sometimes you get them and you put them in like a cooler with ice and then they never really return to the exact same consistency. So I'm wondering if like ones in airports and stuff like that are like shipped maybe in certain types of containers, or they're sitting in the airport for like a really long time and maybe they're like close to their expiration date or like anything like that. Because when I get the ones like right now, from Whole Foods, which I'm sure have like probably the premier perfect bars, almost every batch is like right on point these days.
Okay, that's good to know. I had no idea about that honey thing. All
Good
right,
tangent on perfect bars.
you ready to move on?
Yeah, totally. Go for it.
Cool. Do you want to kick this next part off?
Oh yeah. So I guess one cool thing about my cut that I meant to mention earlier was that I contacted Alberto Nunez and Brian Miner, who was my coach for a little while, and I was like, "Yo, I'm about to be the leanest I've ever been in 6 weeks, and I don't even know if I'm gonna be lean enough to say I'm 10 pounds away from stage or whatever. Like, I've never had anybody with an acute eye ever look at me in a lean state and kind of tell me how far they think I am, what areas are holding fat. I don't know how to pose at all. Like, I've never even worked on it. So these are just things that I feel are important for me if on this journey, if I do decide to compete. So they were nice enough to say that when I get down to my point in late September, I can drive up to Fort Collins where they are and grab a training session. And then they do me like a quick assessment and let me know where I'm at, how much further I might have to go, and all that good stuff. So that's something that I'm super excited about. And I've never really been up to Fort Collins anyway, and I've definitely never trained at the Prodigy gym where Nunez trains. So should be a good time and kind of give me something to push me through these last like 6 weeks or whatever and get me to the goal, you know?
Yeah, the whole learning how to pose is a big barrier for me. The last like
Dude,
couple
I hate it.
check-ins, my coach has been like, "Dude, we need to get you on stage. Like, we can do like another quick 2 weeks. We have a peak week, like, and you're ready. You can do it." And I'm like, I don't. There's like, I'm probably close to being lean enough, but there's this massive other side of it where I know nothing about.
Right. No,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, the posing too, like they say for the whole time that you're doing your contest prep diet, which is, 20 weeks plus or minus, you should be increasing the amount of posing that you're doing leading up to it. And I think by the end, you're supposed to be doing like 20 minutes 3 times a day or some stupid shit like that to prepare for being on stage, because you're potentially on stage for like whatever 3 or 4 minutes for your own presentation, but then you have the group thing where you pretty much have to hold like a front relaxed for the entire time and keep your quads and your lats flexed for like 20 straight minutes. And I think that requires a lot of endurance, and
Sure
and
it
I don't know how to
does.
do any of it.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I don't have a clue.
So yeah, should be some good stuff. And then do you want to talk about the negative topic of the day?
I think we should. I mean, I'll kick it off. So I think today's Tuesday, so maybe Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. I think I remember reading it that John Meadows had passed away in his sleep, and dude, it just felt awful. To me, I felt the exact same way that when I saw that Kobe Bryant had died. Like,
Yep.
just like a very awful feeling. And I mean, it's something that we hear about kind of, I don't want to say like regularly, but like maybe every other month or something like that, someone of like prominence will pass away. And I'm like, oh man, that's sad. But this one, like, it bothered me. Like, I was upset. And I mean, so many people, I feel like, felt the exact same way. And I think it was just kind of like a testament to just how impactful he was in so many people, like in the sport of, bodybuilding directly with people he coached and stuff, but just like the information and the quality of information that he put out. He was, super well respected by all the bodybuilding bros, the pros, the evidence-based community. Like, he was just fantastic in it. I mean, I've watched hours and hours of his YouTube videos. I ran one of his programs in the past, and it was just like, it just sucks, man, really.
Yeah, I feel the same. I pretty much echo everything you said. It hit me really hard as well. So he was 49 years old, and I think the part that really got me even beyond his contribution to the space, which has been massive, is that he has two 12-year-old twins. And it's just, he talks about them a lot. They make appearances on his YouTube channel. Like one of them is a supreme yo-yoer. And so
Sick
he's
yo-yo
always like,
tricks.
he's sick. So he's always like featuring him in his videos, and he just started coaching football again. And I actually listened to a podcast with him recently where he was talking about how his passion for football is so strong, and now that he's not competing in bodybuilding, it's really like where he's found his kind of next love as he gets older in these things. And it just like I know he's had health issues in the past. Like he had his bladder thing, or it was his colon thing in 2005. But then he had that like heart attack 3 years ago, and since then he has really cleaned it up, and he's been taking his health like super seriously. And I just feel awful for everybody, and I think it would be maybe a nice thing for us to talk a little bit about some of the specific things that he's done that he's contributed to our training. So I know like one of the ones that I talk about a lot and I put on my story the other day is he came up with the rule of 25, which is just a simple rest pause sequence that I use all the time in my own training and in my programming of others. So essentially the idea is that you take a weight that you can do 10 to 12 reps with, and it's really hard. So maybe you're like 1 rep shy of failure, and you do your 10 to 12, and then you just chip away until you get to 25 with about 15 seconds rest in between every set. So you'll go like 12, then maybe 4, then 3, then 3, then 3, then whatever it is to get to 25. So I love that sequence, especially for like isolation movements and movements that are like really safe. Like I wouldn't do it for a barbell back squat or a deadlift or anything like that. But that's one of my favorite ones. If you have any you want to talk about, I think I have a couple other things as well.
Yeah, so one thing that was really wild is when as I was creating our like audio snippet for Instagram yesterday and I was listening to last week's episode, we literally talked about John Meadows on last week's episode because the one thing I used the most frequently from him is for preparing for warm up. So what I'll do is like sets of 6 on like a leg extension or a leg curl or some sort of machine that has like the weight stack. I'll do 6, drop it to like the next one down, 6, 6, 6, 6 until I hit like a hard 6 and like I'm warmed up and I mean I use that for pretty much everything, anything that makes sense to it, or his feeder sets when I'm doing like a more compound style, like maybe a hack squat, right? I'll do a first one with like, maybe empty with like 10, and then I'll just start like loading weights in like half increments until I get up to my working weight and doing like sets of 4 type of deal. So, I mean, I've taken a lot of the things that he's put out there and I incorporate them like literally almost daily in my training for a lot of the warm up stuff. That's a big one for me.
Yeah, he was also the first person that really put it out there prominently that doing leg curls before squatting movements is like a really beneficial thing to do, in that warming up the hamstrings makes the knees move more smoothly throughout range of motion. So that's something I've been doing for years, is kind of like some hamstring pre-activation work on a leg curl variation before I do any kind of bilateral squatting. That feels great. And then he's also somebody that has been big into talking about how as you become an older lifter, as he was and I am becoming, is understanding that yes, mechanical tension is the driver and that we do want to lift heavy weights, but that if it makes your knees not hurt by doing leg extensions first and pumping a bunch of blood into your quads and then going and doing your like pendulum squat or your hack squat or whatever it is, then you're still getting the maximum amount of tension at the fatigue point. You're just potentially doing it with a little bit less weight. But if that allows you to have more longevity and have your body feel good, then those are the things that you need to remember are the big rocks as you kind of move into becoming a slightly older lifter into middle age and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, the goal is to be able to actually perform the movements and move pain-free and stuff. That's something that not to create like a large aside, but I have stopped completely from like, oh, put your legs closer together to target this, like put your legs farther away to like target this. Like I put my feet or, you know, hand position, whatever, in a comfortable, pain-free position that allows me full range of motion. And if that means that I'm getting, you know, 5% less activation of some targeted muscle, like I'm okay with that because it allows my knees to not fucking hurt. And for someone whose knees were in shambles from, you know, 26 to 29 and I needed to have a patella repaired, like I'm okay with that because my knees feel good and I can actually use them. Like it's not worth that extra 4% to me lining my knees up incorrectly and then slowly you know, creating what's like shearing force or something like that by moving the joint slightly outside of the angle it's naturally, you know, intended to move in.
Yep. Totally. No, he's just been a huge influence on so many things. And yeah, man, I'm going to really miss having his content pop up in my YouTube subscriptions. Like that's one thing, like he was really diligent about always putting things out onto YouTube very regularly and Q&A sessions. And a Q&A session literally popped up the day before he passed, and it was like John Meadows Q&A, and I was like looking at it on my subscriptions, and then literally it was like minutes later that I saw that he passed, and it was just this weird conflict of emotions. And yeah, so here we are. At least his content will live forever, and he lives on through all of us, and that's the best gift I think that you can ask for at the end of it.
Agreed. Yeah, it's definitely, it's a hard one for sure. Yeah. For everyone, which I think really speaks volumes.
Yeah, for everything that he was and is and did and all that. So, yeah, totally. Well, let's do a few questions. I don't know if we have time to get through all. What do we have? 10 questions or something like that?
Maybe about that.
We have 10 questions. We're probably not going to get through all of them, but I don't think a ton of them are going to take a ton of time. So we'll just get through what we can.
Yeah. This first one, I'm gonna have you start it off if that's okay.
Okay.
Cool. So the first question is, what made you guys want to have careers in fitness and how did they get started?
Yeah, I got a similar question on a Q&A on Instagram on my story the other day as well. And the truth is, for me, I almost feel like I was born to do this. Like, it sounds weird to say that, but when I was 14 years old, 14, we would always go to the same beach every year in Delaware, Bethany Beach. And I had a buddy named John there. And John started lifting weights a year before me. And I showed up at the beach when I was 14, and he was yoked for a 14-year-old. And I was like, man, I want that, you know, and all the girls were just like, I would always hear them like talking behind his back, like, oh my God, John is so buff, like all this stuff, right? So for me, I started like that. I admired that. That was something I wanted. So that year I went home and like, I started lifting. Like that was a thing that I did. And so I always loved it in that way. I always had that like dream to pursue it. And then it became a bigger deal like athletically for basketball and stuff. And then it was performance based. But I always had that like little boy desire to like have muscles and get the attention or whatever. And then it actually became such a prominent interest in my life that I ended up deciding to sit out part of my junior year of basketball because I was concerned that all of the cardio was going to eat away at my muscle gains. So I did the first half of the season, and then I remember talking to the coach and being like, hey man, I got to focus on this weightlifting thing. And so I did, and I came back and I played senior year, and it was what it was. I had a great senior year. I made all conference. But that's how important it was to me in 11th grade. It was like I was going to sacrifice basketball, which was always my number one passion, so that I could lift weights. So I know that doesn't talk about my career yet, but it kind of talks a little bit about why it was so important for me and how much love I had for it. So when I went to college, I went for, exercise science, sports management, and ended up graduating from there. Didn't go into fitness because all of the jobs were like $32,000 a year. And all of my friends were at like Northrop Grumman and all these like government contractors making like 55 right out of college. And so I ended up going into recruiting, working aviation recruiting, ended up making a bunch of money because it's commission based, but I was miserable. And so in 2009, Anders, who was my college roommate, moved out to San Diego with me, and we started CrossFit PB in 2010, and then everything just kind of progressed from there, and now we're where we are now 11 years later. So that's my story. And we actually covered this in a lot of detail in the very first episode of the podcast. If you scroll back to the very beginning, the first one was about us and kind of why we decided to start the podcast and about our journey and everything. So if you want to listen to us ramble on for like an hour and a half, you can totally go back and do that too.
Yeah, I will try and keep mine short because I did forget we literally covered that in very great detail. Mine was very similar. I got introduced to weightlifting, moving basically right into my freshman year of high school through football, and then kind of very quickly realized I was better at lifting weights than either football or basketball. So after like freshman year, I don't remember. I quit playing basketball. I was like, I'm just going to play football. And I loved playing football for the most part, but what I really loved was seeing how much weight I could put on from the end of one football season to the beginning of the next. And I was okay at football, but I was very good at lifting weights. Not like crazy strong, but just like I got pretty jacked pretty quick, and would put on 30 pounds a year through high school. So that really kind of led me to, going into college, and I was like, I'm going to go for exercise, science. I want to do this. And then I had a family member sit me down and be like, you can't make any money in that. Like, you want to go to school for something you can make money in. And I was like, oh, you're right. Okay. So I went into tech and I got my degree in information technology. Then I moved out to San Diego and I worked in an agency doing basically like web development. And then that moved into some like application development. And then I moved over to a startup, worked in a tech startup as a software engineer. I did that for a total of 7 years. And through all of that, it was really always just a means to my lifestyle, right? At 5 p.m., I was out that door no matter what was going on because I had CrossFit class, and that was really what was most important to me in my life. And then I kind of reached a point where I was fortunate that I had very, very cool jobs, right? I got to wear whatever I wanted to work. It was fun. It was by the beach. I got paid decently, but I just wasn't satisfied with it. And I realized as I made more money, it had nothing to do with the money. It was just like, I didn't want to spend my life in an office. So at the very ripe age of 31 years old, I quit my software job and moved into the nutrition coaching space, which had become like a very massive hobby in my life for the past couple years. I'd already had some clients and stuff like that. And then just said I'm okay if it takes me 10 years to kind of start over and build, but I'm not going to spend my life doing something I don't want to do. And that was in 2018. So it's been a couple of years now, and it has been the best decision of my life. It's been really cool. I was always on the outside looking in as I spent a lot of time around like Brian and Anders and some of the other coaches and stuff, because I kind of just desired what they did. They got to work out in the middle of the day. They didn't have to go at 6 p.m. like I did when I was already all used up from getting my fucking ass kicked at work on stuff. And it was very, very, it has been incredibly rewarding. And that's, how I started. And now things are really just spitballing from there. It's been incredible, to be completely honest.
It takes a lot of hard work, though. I think that's the thing that nothing happens overnight. And you just have to put in the work. You have to really commit to it and understand that you may have a few years of not making that much money as you kind of build up and become comfortable and put out product and all that stuff. So if that's something you're considering, our stories are great and they're, I guess, success stories of sorts, but that definitely didn't happen overnight.
No, definitely. And I guess one last thing I should add is even before I did start, right, I'd already, my job was the last remaining part of the non-fitness and nutrition lifestyle. I was already very well versed in dieting and food and lifting for, years and years. It was just my money came from somewhere else type of deal. So when I did convert, it was I could finally let go of that one piece of my life that felt inauthentic and move completely into authenticity for myself.
Love that.
Cool. So I think we covered that one pretty good. Moving to number 2, why are you so focused on the scale instead of metrics like body fat percentage during this cut?
Yeah, so body fat percentage is a good metric. I think it's great. But I kind of look at body fat percentage like I would look at how you record a 4-ounce chicken breast. Like if you record it raw and it ends up being 25 grams of protein, or you record it cooked and it's 25 grams of protein, one's right and one's wrong. But if you're always recording it the same way, then it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, if you need to lose weight, you'll eat less calories. And if you need to gain weight, you'll eat more calories. So it's kind of the same thing with body fat percentage. Like it doesn't really matter what my body fat percentage is, because if I need to get leaner, I'm going to get leaner. And if I need to gain weight, I'll gain weight. So it's something that I'd like to know, which, as Aaron and I discussed earlier, like I am probably going to go get a DEXA at the end of this cut, just because I'm going to be curious where I'm at. But it doesn't really matter to me right now. The thing that matters the most is that the scale is going down and that my performance in the gym is the same or going up. And as long as I'm not losing strength and the scale is continuing to go down, then I'm pretty confident that I'm not losing too much muscle in the process. So that's good. And then one other thing that I think is a nice intermediary between the scale and body fat percentage, which is something that I'm 100% going to do for my next cut, is I'm going to order a nice set of calipers, and I'm going to take millimeter pinches at specific sites. And I'm not going to add those up and try and say, according to these sites, I'm 12.7% body fat or whatever. I'm just going to mark down what the millimeter mark is. And over the course of the diet, I would like to see those millimeter markers get smaller, which tells me that I'm losing body fat. So I think that that's a really nice way to do it without getting caught up in body fat percentage, but also having like a trackable way to make sure that you're losing fat in the right places.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. The one thing I do want to add to that is, for why it seems, well, one, like there's, besides the calipers, which if you're doing it yourself consistently and you're ordering like a quality pair and a costly pair, they can probably provide some value there. They're just, the more human interaction, the more human error, really. And sure. In terms of other body fat percentage testing things, it's not like cost efficient to do regularly enough to ensure that you're progressing in the right way. Like you wouldn't want to, like, let's say you got a DEXA monthly and you go back and it's like higher. And you're like, did I really just waste a fucking month thinking I'm doing my due diligence when I'm not, type of deal? The scale is just the easiest at our level, right? As an advanced trainee, someone who has a good amount of muscle mass, it's the simplest tool for measuring your progress. And it's not like your body fat percentage is going to be going down considerably and your weight is remaining stable. Like those days are long gone. You know, if you're new into training or untrained or overweight or something like that, that could be a very likely scenario. But where Brian is, like, that's just not the case.
Yep, totally. All right, I'm going to toss this next question over to you to start on.
Yeah.
Why do lots of evidence-based bros suggest over 1 gram per pound of protein when research doesn't support that?
This is a really good question. I really like this one. So the first thing, I have a couple notes that I broke this down by. Number one, what is the goal? If the goal is, let's say, a surplus or even maintenance, I think 1 gram is probably sufficient for a majority of people, especially depending on palate and that sort of thing. But if your goal is fat loss, it becomes kind of like an opportunity cost of where else are you going to push those calories to. You can push them to carbohydrate, you can push those to fat, which are both fuel sources. And in order for, fat loss to occur, we need a lack of external fuel sources so that we can use our own internal fuel source, which is our adipose tissue. And by pushing higher protein to obviously some reasonable threshold, it allows us to preferentially use more of that internal fuel as opposed to an external fuel. We know that protein will pretty much never get stored as body fat because we have a couple of big studies on it where they overfed people on like very large, like enormous protein intakes, and there was no body fat accumulation when they studied it. And in terms of a rate of digestion too, it's going to digest slower than carbohydrate, not slower than dietary fat, of course. But in terms of a volume to rate of digestion, likelihood is speaking in terms of fat loss, it's going to be more beneficial because it's going to digest more slowly. It's more voluminous than fat. So for a satiety standpoint, it's going to be better there. And it really becomes that kind of opportunity cost. type of deal. And then lastly, what I would say is, now I might be speaking a little bit outside of bounds of what might be considered accurate, so take this with a grain of salt. There's like your kind of bleeding edge, cutting edge of things, and then there's like what, research maybe catches up to type of deal. And while the current research doesn't necessarily support it, all of your best physiques in the world, I don't want to speak in absolutes, an overwhelming majority of your best physiques in the world are eating more than 1 gram per pound of body weight, especially when they're dieting. I was listening to a recent podcast with Chris, is it Barakat? Brian, is that how you say his last name?
Yeah, correct.
Who's a natural bodybuilder, like great physique. He's also like an educator, a college professor, researcher type of deal. He studies his things. And then when he was asked plainly, like, well, how much protein do you eat? He's like, oh, when I'm dieting, I'm eating, 250 grams of protein. And that's I think he's around 100, 185 pounds. And he
diets down to like 160 too.
Okay. And he's still eating way north of it. And it just seems to me like the opportunity cost is the biggest real driver there. It's like you have to spend those calories somewhere, spending them on carbohydrate or fat. Once you've kind of reached your thresholds for what you need to get the job done there, it's just going to be more beneficial to spend the rest on protein, especially when you consider the conversion and the thermic effect of feeding, the rate of conversion that needs to get, the rate of assimilation that needs to occur for protein to get converted to a glucose or something like that. It is very advantageous when comparing where you could spend those at. Anything do you have to add to that, Brian?
No, I think you covered it really well. I'll refer you, question asker, to, I think it's episode 4, where Aaron did a complete deep dive into protein, and we covered some of the protein research on protein overfeeding. So if it wasn't episode 4, it was somewhere between like 4 and 6. It was definitely one of the earlier episodes. Check that one out. And I agree. I don't have anything to add on top of that.
Cool. This one we will kick over to you because I don't have a home yet. Now that your home gym is decked out, any plans to go back to regular gym? Anything you miss specifically?
I don't think I'll go back to a regular gym regularly. I think that there's plenty of reason for me to go occasionally. I'd like to go get up to the new N1 HQ and do a few sessions there. I'd like to continue to drop into the gym at Prospect and do a couple sessions there. I like to gym hop. I like to experience new gyms, new equipment, stuff like that. As far as things that I miss, yes. So if my home gym was double the size, I would be adding a chest press machine of some sort, a converging machine, because I'm really tired of having to use free weights for every single chest exercise that I do. That's one thing that's starting to get to me. I would also get one of those pec deck machines, not the stupid old ones where the elbows come together, but the ones where you grip the handles and you squeeze together at the front. So I would get those 2 chest machines. I would also get a dual cable machine because right now I have a single cable, but I can't do anything with both arms because I only have one cable. So I need a dual cable machine. I would love a lying leg curl. That might be getting a little bit too overzealous though, because I do have a seated leg curl. There's other things too. Those are the big prominent ones that stick out in my mind right now. So I definitely think at some point I'll be at least doing 1 session a week in the gym because I really just don't know how much longer I can do dumbbell only chest work. And I don't like the barbell for chest work. It just doesn't work for me at all. It makes me feel like crap and hurts my shoulders. So I'll probably be going to the gym at least on a day where I prioritize chest work at some point here in the future. And that's all I can really think of at the moment.
I don't have anything to add there because I don't know what that's like. This one I'll kick over to you too. It is effects on volume by matching resistance curve to strength curve. For example, a cable lateral raise versus a dumbbell lateral raise.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'm 100% could be wrong on this, but I don't know that that the resistance curve or strength curve necessarily affects volume as much as how that resistance curve or strength curve overloads the muscle, meaning whether it turns it into like a lengthened or mid-range overload movement versus like a short range overload movement. When you look at the dumbbell lateral, it's clearly a short range overload movement. Like the hardest part of the movement is at the top. And in a cable lateral, it's also at the top. So I guess if we were to just look at it in that way, like you're getting more tension on the muscle through the full range in the cable. And you're getting more tension on the dumbbell lateral at the top, I think. But it's weird because like subjectively, and I know sensation is one of those things that we're not supposed to pay too much attention to, but like a dumbbell lateral feels more fatiguing than a cable lateral, even though the resistance curve is consistent. I think that the natural inclination of people would be to say that the cable lateral is more fatiguing because it has resistance throughout the entire range of motion. And I just don't know that that's true, but I don't exactly know why. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I kind of don't. I agree with everything you said. It does feel more fatiguing, but the dumbbell does feel harder. How much in terms of volume demands, I don't know how much it would really change, especially because it's a shortened overload movement, where you generally can do more volume because it's not as damaging. I don't feel strongly saying either way here. What I will say is I really do prefer the cable because I think you can just create tension through a larger range of motion. And by removing your grip out of it, it allows you to just focus on the muscle you want to use. I mean, if we talk about like an exercise that's most commonly performed poorly, it's a cable lateral.
Yeah. Or any lateral.
A dumbbell lateral raise or a lateral raise in general. And like, I know from experience for like 15 years, I performed it very poorly. It's only been like in the last 3 years, I finally figured out how to do it well, where I could actually feel that, get like a subjective pump and that sort of thing from it. Like I performed it poorly and I avoided it for years because I just couldn't do it right. That's a hard one. I don't feel strongly either way.
Yeah, so I guess another way you could look at it is like if you try to match the resistance curve within the same movement. So like Kasim has done those demonstrations with the pendulum squat where it's either reverse banded or it's not reverse banded. And when it's not reverse banded, it's a lengthened overload movement where it's supposed to be extremely heavy at the bottom of the rep. And then when you reverse band it, it essentially moves that resistance up a little bit so that the overload point becomes more mid-range. And so I guess it would be less damaging if you did that. I wonder then if you were to actually, so you had a reverse band on it so that it took the tension out of the bottom, but then you also did a regular band so that it made the top harder. So now you've basically made it into like a short range overload movement instead of a lengthened or mid-range overload movement. So I bet like if you did something like that with the pendulum, it would be even less fatiguing because it's now going to be overloaded in the short range, whereas when you reverse band it, it overloads it in the mid-range, and then if you don't band it at all, it's overloaded in the lengthen range, and the lengthen would be the most fatiguing. So you could make a pendulum squat less fatiguing by changing the resistance curve, but I'm very much not the expert in this area, so I think we should probably move on.
Yeah, maybe do both. Hedge your bet.
Yeah, totally. Always just do more volume.
I meant both exercises.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, one day, one the other day. Mm-hmm. All right, next question, bro. We'll pass this one over to you. Tips for skinny fat. I train hard and smart, but I'm weak and I look like I don't lift.
Okay. So assuming that you are providing us accurate information, that you do train hard and you do train smart, and that you are weak, and that you actually do not look like you lift, and you're not just being overly hard on yourself, because don't get me wrong, there's days I look at myself and I'm like, I don't even look like I lift. What it comes down to is it's time to look outside the gym. So generally when I see clientele that have this sort of appearance, I can almost guarantee you, I always ask for them for blood work because I know that their cortisol levels are going to come back high, and they're very high stress individuals. So that is the very first place I would look. Ask yourself, are you a high stress individual? Get some blood work done. Look at your serum glucocorticoid levels. Generally, serum cortisol is a good starting place if you really want to go deep on that. You can get like a 4-point saliva cortisol test, and most of the places you order with will come with like a practitioner like interview or interpretation for you to help provide you some data there. You can get some of your sex hormone levels checked, get your total testosterone levels checked, get your free checked as well, because you could have like pretty decent total levels, but your free could be completely bound up between your albumin and sex hormone binding globulin. So get those looked at. And then what does your sleep look at? What does your sleep look like? Those are the first, like, those are that is the rest of the equation pretty much. And I guarantee you, if you really are training hard, smart, and you're having those problems, your stress levels, looking at your stress levels, being realistic there, getting your serum cortisol checked, getting your sex hormones checked, and then lastly, are you eating enough? Is your weight increasing slowly over time? Have you been the same weight for 10 months, a year? Just start adding carbohydrate pretty much to your diet, and see if that changes things. But that is a very, very comprehensive check down, and I guarantee you will find a hole in one of those like 5 places I just went through.
Yeah, that I agree. I have one other thing to add. I tend to see this look or this self-perception in people that don't commit long term to phases of dieting. So they're like, "Oh, I feel really small right now. I need to put size on. I'm going to go on a surplus for however long." And then like maybe they get 3 weeks into it or 4 weeks into it and they're like, "Oh, I feel fat right now. I think I need to go on a diet." And suddenly they're dieting and they don't really have an endpoint. They're just like, "Oh, now I feel small again. I'm going to start eating more." And it's just these like weird oscillating things, these phases with no direction or reason aside from this internal feeling of I feel small or I feel big or I need to cut or I need to bulk or whatever. So without knowing this person's age or many factors, I find myself wanting to advise them to just go gain weight. Like you kind of took the same approach where you're like, are you eating enough? Are you eating enough carbs? Because if you're skinny fat, the first word in skinny fat is skinny. So you just need to you need to put weight on. And because you're skinny fat and don't have great results so far, you probably could body recomp. If you're giving yourself a surplus, you can probably gain muscle and you might even lose fat along the way if you just commit to the process. Again, without knowing what your training looks like, you say it's smart. I'll guess, since you follow me, that it's probably within the realms of smart. But I always find myself, for people that are in their first few years of training, and I don't know if that's you or not, but first few hard years of training, is really eat the food and really focus on compound movements for load. Like unless you're an advanced athlete, you probably don't need to be doing the things that we talk about in our podcast, like worrying about the length in position and the shortened position and mid-range overloads and partial reps and all this stuff. Like literally take a Google search and Google like Reg Park 5x5 program. And this is like a dude from the 1940s that used to just do, 5 different exercises, 5x5 for full body, and did them like 3 times a week, or maybe it was 5x8. He had a few different iterations of it. But you literally just did that workout full body 3 times a week, compound movements, and you eat a shit ton of food and you just kind of grow. So if you're still in kind of the early stages of your training and you're willing to commit 6 months of just eating in a surplus, putting on muscle and weight, and then going through a dedicated period to strip it off, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised with what you find underneath.
Yeah, that is very good advice. I mean, that was me. I started out I started skin and bones when I started lifting, like stupid skinny. And then after that first year, I was between probably 16 to 20% body fat for like literally the next almost decade, really, at least 8 years type of deal. It was very long until I actually got any sort of lean, really.
Yeah. You just got to keep putting weight on. And like I always talk about how I graduated high school at 170 pounds because I always was trying to stay lean. Like I was definitely putting muscle on. I was 5'10", 170, but then that first semester at college, I gained 30 pounds in 4 months, and that was life changing. Like that changed my strength levels. It changed my entire body. I basically went from being a boy to a man in like a 4 month period of just eating all the food. And I know we don't have to dirty bulk, and you don't. I wouldn't recommend dirty bulking necessarily. Like eat as much clean food as you can, but you got to put your body in a state where it's gonna get stronger, it's gonna adapt, it's gonna get larger, and that's one kind of surefire way to do it.
100%.
All right, I'll kick this one over to you too. After days of untracked surplus, back to maintenance or into a deficit to balance out? I feel like there's 1,000 ways you can answer this.
I think there's only one way I answer it though, and it's back to maintenance. When you go into a deficit to balance it out, you are reinforcing poor habits, in that it is you can control that your binges or poor adherence days by just going into a calorie deficit the next day and then staying the same, and it just reinforces bad habits. I always 100% of the time instruct my clients when they have those days, we pick right back up where the plan is, which is go back to maintenance. If you are at maintenance, you have like a travel day, maybe you have like a birthday or something like that, you just go back to your plan, because when you do it once, you open the door to do it twice, a third time, a fourth time, and then it becomes like, oh, hey, I can just like binge and eat this chocolate cake tonight, and then tomorrow I'll just like, only have breakfast and lunch and then fast for 15 hours, and then I'll be back to where I am. And it becomes like a crutch. So I always recommend just going back to maintenance.
Yeah, so when I said there was 1,000 ways to answer this, I meant that it was very context dependent, because what if, like you said, you go back to the plan. So what if the plan was you're on a diet, but then you had a couple of days of untracked surplus? Then you still say go to maintenance, or you say go back to your diet and get back to dieting?
Okay, gotcha. I assumed, I guess, which was poor on my part, that their plan is maintenance.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily get that, but that could be the case. I mean, I just think that there's many ways you could answer it based on kind of what the context is, right?
Yeah. So I guess for me to back up a little bit, whatever your plan was before the untracked surplus day, go back to what your plan was.
Cool.
Yep.
I like that.
Yeah.
I agree with that as well. Okay. This is actually a really good question for you, because I have not done this. Mm-hmm. The person asked, have you ever worked with someone to gain muscle with 0 carbs and had success?
So here's how I'm going to be very brutally honest with how I would answer this. If someone came to me and said, hey, Aaron, I want to work with you, but I'm not going to eat any carbs and I want to gain muscle, I am going to refer them to someone else. Plain as that. I am not going to take on any client that I am not very positive that I can deliver results for, and it's outside my wheelhouse. I'm sure you can, gain muscle with 0 carb. Maybe you're celiac, or maybe there's some reason, but majority of times people want to be low carb over like a fear or digestive intolerances. And in that case, I generally am like, hey, I'm not the best resource for you. Let's find you someone who can deliver the results you want within the constraints you're providing here, which is the 0 carb.
Yeah, I agree. I've never worked with anyone this way, and I think for the sake of this question, I just kind of assumed that there was a health reason for why they needed to go 0 carb.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe this person has even brought up a similar question to me in the past, because I just had like a deja vu moment with it. But no, I haven't worked with anyone. I know that you can. Like Aaron said, you 100% can gain muscle without carbs. I've heard stories about this. I think Menno has even talked about it on a podcast or two. But Aaron and I are definitely not the people to work with for that objective.
Agreed. List one, Brian. Let's kick over your way. What are your biggest factors you consider when training a female?
Yeah, there's a few. I think we've covered this on a few other episodes, or at least briefly mentioned some of the factors. But women do tend to be slightly more slow twitch dominant. So that usually means that they can handle more volume than men. It may also mean that they respond better to a slightly higher rep range, like maybe it's a 15 to 20 instead of a 12 to 15 and a 12 to 15 instead of a 10 to 12. So I don't think it's like a drastic difference, but I think maybe a slightly higher rep range. The volume of work is a big one because of the slow twitch nature. The women often find it more difficult to do enough volume to really floor them. So, or even to like this is a very big generalization, but a lot of times you see women training and they just kind of are like, okay, I have 5 sets of 10 to do, and they do 5 sets of 10 with the same weight with like a really short rest, and then they kind of move on. And that's something that a guy could do too. I'm not trying to be sexist here and be like women always do this, but it is like a common thing that you see in the gym where there's just a nominal amount of weight lifted. So one of the things that I tend to do is try to push women specifically to focus on progression and progressive overload and adding weight or reps to the bar week to week so that they eventually reach that point where they're not just doing 5 sets of 10 with the same weight with a 60-second rest in between, but that they're actually getting to the point where they're working so hard that they are going to need to take a sufficient rest period, which kind of leads me to my next point, which is recovery between sets. So women are also going to recover a little bit faster between sets, so rest periods can be a little lower. You'll see that in like my Paragon programming, how I often use 1 to 2 or up to 3 minutes rest for things. Whereas if I'm programming for someone like me or Aaron or a bigger guy, like if we're doing heavy sets of a hip hinge or a back squat, we're going to be resting like 3 to 5 minutes in most cases between top sets. So that's one way. Let me think. What else would we do? We definitely, depending on what the female's goal is, most women tend to prefer more glute and shoulder work and less chest work. So that's something that I do try to put into the Paragon programs too, is that we usually will only have what would be like considered a maintenance volume of chest work, like maybe 1 movement on each upper body day, whereas we'll have 2 movements on each upper body day for something like back and delts, as those muscles are going to be more important muscles for the upper body. And then we'll also have a little bit more glute work on leg day to kind of maybe offset a little bit of the work that we're not doing for chest on upper body day. So a couple different ways that we can balance volume and prioritize muscle groups for women. I think those would probably be the big ones off the top of my head. Do you have anything to add?
I do not. I think you covered that one really well.
Okay, sweet.
This last one, want me to kick it over to you to start?
Sure, yeah.
So question is, I've made no progress on bench for the full mesocycle. Any thoughts why?
My very first thought is that you're probably not eating in a surplus. Bench press and pressing movements in general, and especially for women. I think this was a woman that asked this, but especially for women, pressing movements, upper body pressing, are going to be really, really slow to make progress. That's overhead press, bench press, dumbbell pressing, any of that sort of thing can be really slow. If you are not in a surplus, it is very likely that you should just look at not making progress as a positive on something like a bench press. As long as you're not like a novice or early intermediate, like if you've been training for 5+ years, then that would be something that I would look at, is the amount of food that you're eating. I would potentially take a look at your technique and see if there's any ways that you could be bracing better, using your scapula more effectively, potentially squeezing your glutes, pushing your feet through the ground, things like that. You could potentially also have started the mesocycle too close to failure. So this is one of the big things, is especially for strength work, we don't want to be training really close to failure at all, because it can mess up the motor learning process and it kind of trains your body to be slow. And in strength training, you want to train your body to be explosive. So reps that are really close to failure are not going to increase strength as effectively as reps that are shy of failure. So if you started a mesocycle and you're too close to failure, I could see where you wouldn't make any progress along the way because you're not giving yourself runway to create adaptations and enhance motor pattern learning and things like that. So always important to start mesocycles shy of failure, especially on movements like that. Those are off the top of my head. Any thoughts from you, Aaron?
Yeah, so the first one I have is, are you sleeping enough? Are you
Hmm.
recovering aptly between your sessions? Again, are you taking care of these other aspects outside of the gym that are going to support those necessary adaptations that need to take place? So the first one being sleep. Second, are you aptly fueling your training sessions? For example, are you going into these strength sessions fasted, training at 5 a.m. type of deal? Kind of setting yourself up for failure a little bit in that regard. So don't be training fasted if you're trying to do strength work. Get something in you, some carbohydrates, some protein type of thing. Or if your schedule allows for it, train a little bit later in the day. I had a very interesting personal anecdote story where there was a period where I don't remember if you remember this, Brian, but I switched to training at like 6 in the morning when we were going through a snatch cycle
Yeah.
or something like that. And then it was difficult, but I was like, okay, this is going pretty good. And then one of our friends came in back into town, and I wanted to work out with him, so we worked out at like after work at like 5 p.m. instead. And I literally put like 15 pounds on my snatch in like the next
Yeah.
week just by not training in the morning. It was
Yeah.
silly. So that might have something else to do with it as well. So look at your sleep and then look at your fueling in proximity to your training session, training fasted, or time of day.
Yeah, I wonder if this is just specific to bench press not progressing versus like other movements are progressing. Um, I don't really know, but it's interesting that she focused specifically on bench, which makes me think that if it was everything, it would just be like, hey, nothing's progressing. Why isn't this working? And then I think it's like your sleep and your nutrition and blah, 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 and all these things. But as far as why it's specifically the bench, I think the reasons I mentioned are a good place to start. And then if you're doing all those things, then definitely looking at the lifestyle factors that Aaron got into are definitely good places to be.
Yeah, or any maybe potential injuries or anything like that, or do you have certain pain or a nagging pain or something like that? Because when you have certain pain in joints, it's going to be hard to fully, recruit all of those motor units because you have that limiting pain factor there too. So that
Yeah.
could be one. Is if you're having any elbow or shoulder issues, that could be limiting you.
Yep. For sure. Yeah. So I think that's it. We actually got through all 10 questions.
Yeah, I think it was a really cool episode. Those are some really, really great questions. So thank you everyone for providing them. Hopefully we answered them with appropriate context and they were very, very helpful. Anything from you, Brian, before we wrap this one up?
No, I think that was good. I will catch you guys next week.
All right. As always, thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.